Hello and welcome to Portal Gatherings, a very special portal panel with Chris Jantzen and Leslie Powers, who have a great amount of experience between the two of them in navigating the world in an uncertain, or navigating themselves in an uncertain world. I think that's a better way of putting it. So why don't we start with each of you introducing? I'm going to start with Leslie because she's a lady, introducing yourselves and telling us about your, like, why should we listen to you?
Good question. Well, I professionally have been a clinical social worker for over 35 years. So I've been in the field of helping people with transformation and healing, especially focusing on trauma healing and both individually and with groups. I've been doing a lot of group work recently, and I've done home-based and all sorts of ranges of problems and settings and populations. So I have just a broad base of experience there. And I've been studying for the last several years natural law and getting deeper into esoteric studies and getting more interested and curious in history and how all of our shared trauma really can be understood through the lens of history as well. So that brings I've really been looking at my role in the natural law world is how to integrate that with my work as a therapist and kind of specialist in trauma and healing trauma. I've been, doing presentations and so forth for in the natural law community. I've had been on podcasts and so forth as well. So I'm a work in progress here, but I
Yes,
have a
we
lot of
all are.
yeah, a lot of enthusiasm and passion. Yeah,
Wonderful.
glad to be
Wonderful.
here.
Glad to have you here.
Thank you.
And Mr. Chris Jantzen, do you want to introduce yourself and your work?
Sure, I'd love to. Thank you. Thanks, Agnieszka, for having me here. And it's good to meet some folks I have not met yet. So I've been part of Autonomy, where Agnieszka and I met for quite some time. And behind you, you see the Tree of Life. And I've hung that for 5 years this year, doing the End Evil podcast once a month, once a week show, basically. And once a month we do kind of a subgroup called the One Great Work Warriors, which was something that I kind of spearheaded, facilitating a small group. And then Leslie and I have been part of another group called the Freedom Under Natural Law, and we created conferences, online conferences, and this year's going to be the fifth Freedom Under Natural Law conference. So, I've been working really steady since 2020, putting out content and doing interviews and really talking about natural law and in context to the world we're in as things are changing around us. 2020 was such a big moment to really for me to start speaking up. And I had been gearing up to release this series of six presentations that I created for the beginning of the End Evil podcast right when 2020 and things started really changing and the world started changing because of those events of what I call the scamdemic. Um, and so it just was timing. It was time for me to speak to the world. And to me, the really most important point of all is to recognize the reason I talk about evil is because of this book right here. This is called The End of All Evil by Jeremy Locke. And I do have copies of this book on my website if anybody's curious. My website's endevil.life. And Jeremy Locke says evil is the destruction of freedom. And I think that's a great way to explain the major problem we're dealing with as humans in the world in context to the reality that we're in at this time. That evil's an abundant force in today's world because morality is not respected, because natural law is not well understood, that the things we do in this realm matter and affect others, and that we're experiencing the outcome of what all these people are doing and thinking and acting is creating a situation where we're all basically slaves to an immoral world of stealing And that is what we want to change, that dynamic. And I want to work towards a future where people are starting to learn that it does matter how we treat one another, and that if we don't steal from one another in all these forms of evil, then we can actually live free, right? Freedom is something that we can work towards. And I have that hope. And that's why I do the podcast, and that's why I reach out to people, because I think there is a lot of hope despite how difficult the situation is for humanity at this time and place in history.
So what is it about finding peace in among or amidst a apocalypse? Oh, I can't speak suddenly. Finding peace in an evil world. What's that concept all about?
Well, I mean, inner peace, ultimately what all the work that Leslie and I discuss and that's discussed on the End Evil podcast, it ends up, what can we do? I'm not telling people to go out into the world and force other people to do anything. I'm saying what we can do is look inward, and we can work on being moral human beings. And you know, in a chaotic world where there's a lot of people around you doing things that are immoral and wrong, and you're trying to do what's right, a lot of times it feels like you're the one who's doing the wrong thing because everybody else is going with the crowd. But I would argue that there is a such thing as objective morality. And that's where I really have agreed with Mark Passio from whatonearthishappening.com. And he really fired me up, helping me to realize that this is something that more people need to understand, because even in a chaotic world, even when things are going wrong all around us, if we know deep down from a principle place what's right and what's wrong and what we're here to do, then it doesn't matter how chaotic things are around us. And a simple allegorical or symbolical thing to think of is a surfer on a wave, right? A huge wave that the average person who's not dealt with waves a lot might get, run over by the wave and rolled over, but a surfer, someone that sees a wave as a challenge and wants to ride it, can find this peace in the midst of the chaos, right? And surf the wave. And so I think that's what we need to do with learning to be right on the side of right, and that there is a such thing as right.
What about the tools that a person, this question is for Leslie specifically. Can you tell me more about some practical tools that somebody might implement to increase their peace among the chaos in the world?
Yes. The inner work is where the answers are, and that peace comes from within. And as long as we're looking outward for some answer from a person, a place, an institution, a religion, a government, we are going to be spinning our wheels and not finding actual peace. We may find some temporary comforts, we may find some illusion of peace, but as long as we're seeking external to ourselves, that it's elusive ultimately, or only temporary. And so the inner work really involves a deep dive into self-discovery. And I would add a discovery or a witnessing and a studying of nature, and how nature expresses its laws, its ways, separate from human intervention or interruption. And so I would start, as far as practical tools, with slowing down one's life, one's movements, one's speech, one's agenda, and be with self, and ideally be in nature, to then observe, to feel, to recognize, to be curious about what one thinks, feels, what our impulses are to do. Ask where this comes from. Where do we get our thoughts? Are our thoughts our own? Have we taken on a belief system because that's what we've been exposed to, programmed, indoctrinated to believe, and just assumed it's true because that's what we were told. And to start to do some questioning. Now, I will say that some of this process of questioning disrupts our illusion of peace, and that we may get upset. We may feel like the whole world's upside down. And that is part of the process, I think, ultimately to find like a real peace is to to sort through the illusions and the dogmas and come to the core of what is right and true and be aligned with that. And when we are in alignment, with our mind and our body and our spirit, our thoughts, feelings, and actions, then there is an inherent peace to our integrity and living in integrity and then acting in integrity. Because when we are in conflict within ourself and especially within ourself and within our, between our actions and our values, let's say, it's going to create disease, both mentally, psychologically, and physically.
Well,
So just
essentially, what's happening in the world is people are following someone else's agenda, right? And those suggestions of what to do are on all magazine covers, they're in the news, they're even on food packaging. There are all these things that are telling us who to be, how to be, where to be. And in reality, the one thing that I teach in my classes that's very along the lines of what you just said is that deferred responsibility where it comes to giving our power to doctors, lawyers, governments, teachers, all of these people. And so when you implement inner self parenting, when you realize that you're the mother and the father of your own inner child, that responsibility comes back to you. And then as an adult, you can make a decision which information to follow and which not to, as opposed to which guru to obey.
Yeah, I agree. And I'll just add the piece about doing our own trauma work, right? I think we are all impacted by trauma from, our generationally going back. We can see that our ancestors have been, through many hardships and deeply traumatized, and that we do inherit in some way some of that, as well as living in the world the way it is. It disconnects us from ourselves in so many ways, and there's such child abuse and man-made trauma that we all are impacted by. So doing the work around recognizing how we have been wounded, how our hearts, souls, and minds and bodies have been hurt, and how some of our natural spirit has been thwarted by authoritarian behaviors external, whether it's parents, school systems, or whatever. There's a lot of untangling to do and healing work to do around those things. And I think it's a very worthwhile endeavor to spend time in those quiet moments to reflect on the ways that we have been hurt in our lives and to do the actual root healing. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And even like what I mentioned, the magazines, they can be destroying your self-confidence by giving you subliminal messages of inadequacy or comparison, all of these things that are, leading to nowhere.
I went through one period of time in my life, this was back in like 2013, and I still kind of describe it as my midlife crisis slash awakening experience. And to me, it felt a lot like that movie, The Matrix, when Neo sits up, and he's realizing the situation he's in reality, that he's been in this simulation, basically, right? I came to some hard realizations about the world that I was, to that point, somewhat living with rose-colored glasses, that there were a lot of things about the world that I thought things were okay to a certain extent that were just shattered. And for me, it came from a lot of research of looking into things like 9/11 and geoengineering and the stuff that Richard Grove talks about, the interconnections between, the families that run things behind the corporate scenes, and then even the evil ones that run these whole structures. It's like, wow, this situation is really, really messed up, you know? And what I remember from that experience was that coming through that realization, it put me in a tailspin. You know, I had to like reinvent myself and realize, wait, where do I stand on things? Things aren't what I thought they were. A lot of the ways I just kind of generally looked at the world were I had to go through all that, and that was a dangerous period of time for me. I realized looking back, and seeing all how much wilder and crazier, and you know, conspiracy theorists used to be like the weirdos, and now it's like, who's not a conspiracy theorist? So many conspiracies have come true at this point that people are kind of like, well, yeah, you know. I think more and more people have come to some point or another in their experience and their relationship with the world and government or school or their workplace where like things aren't jiving, just things that just don't seem right. Things aren't lining up. And if you actually really then start researching and going down all these trails and you realize why they're not right, you realize that we're living in a world that is very topsy-turvy. And so having Leslie Powers come into my life has been very exciting because here's someone who's been a lifetime of therapy, dealing with kids, dealing with families, dealing with people with all kinds of difficult problems. And I've dealt with people with real mental illness in my own family. And so what's interesting is that I've realized the more I've talked to her is that the whole realm of therapy, the idea is generally that, oh, there's something wrong with you. You're going to see a therapist. The therapist is going to help you make some sense of things and feel better about yourself. And then you're going to fit back into the society as a normal, you know, a normal person. But when you come to realize that society, normal society is, you know, basically evil, you know, they're basically all down for stealing each other's stuff and allowing other people to steal other people's stuff as much as they want and voting on that, which is another form of stealing. So the average person in the average society is living in an evil, topsy-turvy, upside-down life to begin with. So the goal isn't to make ourselves feel centered and peaceful in that situation, because you shouldn't feel good in that situation. That situation is a lot of people robbing one another and stealing from one another. So it's more like, yeah, you have to go through this really frustrating, life-changing experience of realizing how evil the really world is, and then you have to go through your own struggle to feel like, how can I find some sort of center in this madness and still make my way through life, still have enough money to pay my bills and eat food, and yet still kind of work out of this system that I don't really want to be part of. And it's very, very difficult tightrope walk. You know, I can see where a lot of people could fall into various types of addiction along the way or problems. I've run into my own problems along the way. I'm still struggling, and we're always going to be. But I do think that there are some specific, you're asking about specific things that can really help to deal with this overwhelming situation, and realizing that you're not trying to make yourself fit into a screwed up world. You're trying to find center in the apocalypse, is what I'm calling it. And the apocalypse actually means the great unveiling or opening. It doesn't actually mean destruction. So we're living in a time where everything is out there. Every lie that you can imagine is out there, and we have to kind of find a way to discern reality in this madness, and to find a way to feel good about who we are, and to find value in our own being and life in a world that's mostly doing a lot of bad to one another.
Yeah. And while not getting completely like black-pilled and not, hopeless or about the, future of humanity, because it's not all bad, right? There are there's many good things still in this world. And that's where I think being in nature really helps me to ground into what's real and what is beautiful, because nature itself shows this resilience that is incomparable to anything else that I can, imagine. And as I go through my days and I take some responsibility for how I interact in the world, I'm pretty much surrounded by good people and good experiences. And so I think that we have a lot of say when in driving our own ship here, what we experience.
Yeah, I wanted to touch on that word society that Chris mentioned, because in India, the word society means neighborhood. So basically, the people who live around you, the people you interact with, are your society. And in that vein, we can create our own society and associate with whomever we find appropriate for ourselves. More inner parenting kind of thing. When you end up associating a lot of the time with people with whom you ideologically do not agree, that causes all sorts of, schism, uh, pulling apart of your inner self. You're pretending to be somebody you're not and stuff. Yeah, don't. I was just thinking about going to questions, but I wanted them to respond to what I'm saying, and then we'll go to you for a question, okay? But yeah, what do you guys think about that? Like the society is what we make it. It's not what's imposed upon us.
Well, I certainly, I am a person, like I said, ultimately I'm an optimist and a dreamer. I've always loved dreaming, but in school they would, basically yell at me for dreaming in so many words, and it was like you're shoved into a room with 30 other kids from your zip code, like it or not. You know, I would have probably been the type of young person to start creating my own community and networking society when I was very young, because I was a very intelligent young being. But right away, that was taken from me with a forceful hand. So, yeah, it is what you make it life, but it also is what you're dealt. And so I think that's kind of where I'm talking about. We have to work on finding center, because the new agey kind of world would have you believe that you could just manifest anything, that you could just imagine roses and flowers in your life and money coming from the sky and draw pictures of that and meditate on that, and boom, that's going to happen for you. But the truth is, there's a lot of obstacles and things out in the world of that, the actual effects of things we've done and things other people have done are creating the reality we're experiencing. So as much as I could dream and hope around that, we got to actually experience what we're actually given. But then what can be done, that's the part that's magic that gets so forgotten, is that the possibilities are endless. And our abilities as being, we have no idea just how many abilities we have. We've never seen a cap on human ability. Every time somebody sets a new record, there's a way to break it. You know what I mean? We really have no idea what our minds and bodies and spirits could do if we put ourselves in that place. And in order to put ourselves in that place, we have to learn to deal with one another. And I've found some amazing things with networking and getting together with other people that share the same principles, that can meet on a deep level. What can be created or produced it's imaginable, but it's unimaginable if we don't have the imagination. But I'd love to hear what Leslie has to say.
Yeah, Leslie,
What specifically do you want me to respond to?
whatever you want.
Because I was looking a little at the question, so I got a little sidetracked on that.
Okay.
I think that, yeah, we are in this interesting paradox. I think that most everything we can see through the lens of a paradox. And we are in a world where I think our brains are left, right hemisphere, right? So we're built for a certain polarization in the way we interpret the world. And that polarity, the natural polarity, is being exploited uh, by the powers that be, that the social engineers and of the world, the dark occultists, however you want to define them, the media that we receive, the way that our political systems are set up. And that's a big part of, my work and my observation is that seeing the way that people are divided. We're divided from each other. We're divided within ourselves. The trauma very much is about creating internal division. And so what we see is this rampant extremism, and it leads to this divisiveness and conflict and sides. And there's no solution in that mindset from my point of view. And understanding how healing occurs, it really comes through uh, the paradox of bringing care and compassion into the equation and coming from a place of seeking true understanding. And when you recognize that what we're really seeking to change in the world is to eliminate the violence, okay? And we're looking at what is morality. I like seeing it in a very simplified, way that Mark Passio defines, because it's not religious. The term morality has become like a dirty word. It's become something that people are like, oh, you're a prude, because so much has been shoved down people's throat through religion and indoctrination of the school system, where people are being told they're wrong for a lot of things that aren't wrong, and and it's leading to a lot of oppression and a lot of psychological uptightness and guilt and shame that is very unnecessary. So when I think of morality, I think of more of like what we're not willing to do. We care enough about humanity and living beings and the earth herself that we are not going to go justify hurting others. We're not going to hurt these beings. We aren't going to steal from them. We aren't going to, you know, you know, lie and steal and murder and rape and assault. And I think that most people in the world would agree to that, you know, and that it's both we can see objectively that when you commit violence, it hurts others and it creates chaos and divides people. We can measure those effects, but we also can discover it and know it subjectively, internally, when we are in a mindful state of spiritual kind of connection to each other. We can know in our hearts that when someone else is suffering, that we suffer, that it's painful, and that there is a sense of if we come together in a way, we can lift everyone up. There's certain things here, but outside of those wrongdoings, people deserve, in my viewpoint, the freedom to live as they so choose, right? And and what's hard in our world today is that, even many, many people who would agree with this are not seeing how the systems that they're engaged in are doing evil, are hurting others, and that by our alignment and cooperation and agreement, implicit agreement through participation, that we are part of the problem. And that brings up, if when people start to get that, that's an inner conflict. That creates dissonance, and it puts all sorts of conflicts and dilemmas inside a person that I think is overwhelming and has led to a lot of people pushing away what they see. They don't want to fully see it because it feels like too much and impossible and a threat to our own like sense of security. So some of my thoughts.
Why don't we get some questions from the audience, starting with Mr. Don Karp?
Thank you. Hi.
Hi.
I like a lot what Leslie said. I agree that mental health would be about seeking connection, and your life vision or mission might be about connection with your parts of yourself that are at disagreement, connecting with other people and connecting with nature, and that the real healing comes from being in the present. Because fear is about the future, and anger and a lot of other feelings are about the past. So if you're in the present, there's only love. And this is about heart source intelligence. But Chris, I think you need to go a bit deeper on some of the things you mentioned, especially mental illness. There is no mental illness. This is a construct invented by the medical profession for profit and control. There's no such thing. A very few people have organic brain diseases, but otherwise there's no biomarkers, no science. And the labels like schizophrenia have no, they're subjective. I can tell you that I was in mental hospitals in and out for 8 years with schizophrenia and a few other labels until I realized they're making money off of me. I'm not going back there again. I'll do whatever it takes not to go back. So part of the thing that I did was join a group, the first national group that was political ex-patients group, and later I found out about peer support. People, what really a lot of people need that is not talked about much is just to listen to somebody and hear their experiences. We don't need to hear their label. We need to hear a lot more than just a few words about what they're experiencing. So please, before you go too much further with this idea of mental illness, check what it's about, because it's a dangerous, abusive, oppressive term that's become popularized. And everybody wants to know, what's my diagnosis? Let's compare, especially teenagers. Very, very caustic.
Oh, I'm actually really glad that you said that, Don. I appreciate that, because actually what you're saying is what my experience has been, is that the I should, if I were to say it, the label that's been given to, like for instance, one person that I lived with in my own family, those diagnoses are given out way freely, and they don't necessarily characterize a person, right? And what I've recognized in my own life is that we are all experiencing those same things. Some people experience them in a way more extreme manner. And what I've noticed is there is sort of a line of when a person isn't able to be accountable for their own actions, that's an extremely difficult thing to deal with. And that type of illness has become more abundant in our society. And I think that has a lot to do with the lack of connection and, the labeling that people impose on each other then becomes self-imposed, and people then act out what they've been told they are, because we're programmable people. That being said, I don't know what term to necessarily use when somebody loses the ability to hold themselves accountable in whether it's a community, a society, a group of people, a couple, a relationship, but not having the ability to see that things you're doing are harming the person you're around is a pretty scary thing to deal with. And I'm saying I have that experience of dealing with that and seeing how that plays out in reality. And I think a lot of that is due to the way we're living as humans and accepting as being okay that is not okay.
I'm sorry to hear that you had that problem, and I think probably it's not that uncommon these days. More and more people are losing it. I wouldn't say they're sick or they're ill, because again, that allows the medical profession to come in and medicalize them. And like, let's take one of these. Let's take PTSD. A soldier comes home from the war or goes crazy on the front. What do? Oh, he has PTSD. He doesn't have shell shock or battle fatigue, because those terms are real. They tell what's been going on and what the solution might be. PTSD is very clinical. It's about being in an office with a psychiatrist and putting a definition that does not speak to the cause or the solution. So we don't want to talk about war, so we'll put it into a different category. We won't talk about shell shock or battle fatigue anymore. We'll talk about PTSD. And so I don't think these diagnostic terms are the beginning of a whole line of oppression that comes afterwards. You look at the work of Paula Kaplan, Kaplan with a C, is a psychiatrist who sat on the DSM committee where women were being called mentally ill because they had premenstrual syndrome. And there was another illness that came up of women who got raped because those women caused the rape, of course. It was thinking that she couldn't fight. Those kind of illnesses persisted for a while, but fortunately, there's others that are in there. Like homosexuality used to be considered an illness. And you go back to what is morality or what is freedom. And those terms, to me, you got to really define your terms. But this illness idea, I'm heavily against that. I'm sorry. You mentioned illness, someone who's not responsible for what they do. Everybody's responsible. Maybe they don't have the ability to respond, but they're still responsible. Like, you don't hear too many court cases about people getting off of murder because they were crazy when they did it. That's just not a legal reality anymore, because the
I
system.
think, Don, I think Leslie wanted to respond to what you're saying before
Okay.
we get too much far away from what she wanted to say.
Sure, yeah, thanks. Thanks for
Yeah,
Oh,
thank you. It's a really complicated soup because I've worked in this field for, gosh, a long time. And I was lucky enough to have a professor in my graduate school who he was supposed to be teaching us the DSM, and he basically made it optional. And he said, this is a book that I think he was even on one of the committees, and he said, this is a book that's just about people, meeting in a room and looking at statistics essentially and trying to organize data and call things names. And it's changed and evolved over the years. And ultimately, what it is in a practical way is the way of putting a number on putting a code on a billing to get pay reimbursement, right? So it's really in a practical way, diagnoses have become a way of getting your your help paid for and being given a acceptable in the medical lens justification for that help, right? And it's can be very limiting and it can be very depersonalizing, and it's certainly not getting to the core, the heart of a human suffering. Okay. That said, there are ways that people seek out an understanding, a definition of what's going on with them, that can give them some kind of a framework, and it can certainly guide some helping ways of helping a person. So like PTSD, for example, is, if you read the DSM diagnosis itself, it actually talks about people being exposed to something that has been overwhelming to their sense of self, and certain just descriptions, basically descriptions of things that happened to someone who is engaged, who has experienced something that was beyond their capacity to psychologically manage, right? And
not their fault.
so
It's not their fault that they behave that way. That's the situation.
yeah, the idea of fault or blame, I'm not sure, in my work, or most everybody that my colleagues would never see a diagnosis as being the fault of an individual, and most people in the field are very heart-centered and are more concerned with finding a solution to help that person, and knowing, and the research does show that the primary change agent in therapy is the relationship that the person has with with their therapist or whatever the helper person is. And so all these tools and research-based techniques are really kind of, fluff. They're added things. Some of it is based on good information that we can then join with an individual and help them walk through a journey of healing. And so when the professor that impacted me, he said, start with where the person is at. Look at the person in the context of their situation. Be curious about their locus of control. Do they feel that they are powerless and have no control over the outcome of their life? Do they project the power external to themselves? If they see it as an external locus of control, then we want to help them to build a sense of self-efficacy and power to make change in their own life. So it does come back to self-responsibility. It comes back to compassion. It comes back to patient presence and walking alongside people. Part of what I'm doing right now is group therapy, and I'm seeing this beautiful experience of people joining with each other and finding hope from, not feeling so alone, not feeling like they're the only person on earth experiencing these things. We're getting to have a lot of conversations about how the external world, their jobs, the government, whatever, is really putting them between a rock and a hard place. All these deep topics, are coming up, and I think these types of situations should be much more common and normalized. We should all have a group of people that we can sit down and talk to. I think, with some of the diagnoses, the diagnoses can actually cause harm, because of the stigma and the ways that people interpret them and the way it's met in communities. So I'm not a fan of the DSM or the diagnoses at all. That's not the lens that I approach helping people. And I will say that I think that more people in my field are feel the same. And we have with, for example, the internal family systems model that's becoming mainstream is very much has a spiritual component and a much deeper understanding of healing and how human psychology works. So I know a lot of people have been really hurt by the system, and there's good reasons that they feel that way. And there's a lot of horrendous things that have gone on. But on the other side, again, there's a lot of goodness as well if if you can discern and sort out what is what.
I'll just close so I won't go
Yeah.
on this because it could be endless. I'll just say that one sentence. In this insane world, crazy is the new normal.
Very good. Thank you, Don. Does anybody else have questions for either Chris or Leslie today? Of the wonderful people listening?
Well, I did like the other thing Don was mentioning is it is really a good thing to define terms, and especially like if one person uses a term and someone feels like, wow, what did you mean by that? That gets my brain going in a different direction. Well, we can be thinking two different things and using the same word. When I'm talking about morality, I'm talking about our ability to discern between right and wrong. And I think that ability depends on our ability to agree that there is a such thing of right and wrong. And we live in a world where people are calling all kinds of things right and wrong, which is why we use the term natural law, right? As opposed to man-made law. Like man's law is I can make up a rule and then I can force anybody around me to do that rule if I'm strong enough or I got enough guns or weapons. And that's what's right because might makes right. That's a very childish way to act, but we're still acting that way in mass as humanity, right? So what is freedom, right? The ability to not be enslaved, right? Freedom is the ability to make a choice, is to choose. And that's one of the most fundamental, amazing, magical, divine aspects of being alive and having a body and this vehicle that the universe and the divine experiment has given each of us is to make decisions, to make choices. And if other humans are making rules and saying, oh, you can't make choices because your hair's the wrong color or we don't like you or you're born on the wrong side of the line, whatever arbitrary reasons, they're breaking the law, the divine natural law. And that's that the understanding that certain principles and laws exist inherently, whether we like them or not. And that's really the heart of what I think the message that needs to be discussed and understood across the board with everyone. If we can come back and forth and say, yes, there is a such thing that we can agree on some sort of objective morality, is there is a such thing as right and wrong. It's right. You can do whatever you want as a right. But if you steal, if you take things that aren't yours in the form of raping someone, taking their sexual, stealing from their person, lying to them, stealing the truth, basically, trespassing on their stuff, it's like taking their husband or wife, or their loved one. These are pretty obvious forms of taking something that wasn't yours to begin with. And if we can kind of share that golden rule as people, then we can experience the freedom of being able to make choices without someone else dictating what choices you can and can't make because they're of higher authority than you are.
John, did you want to ask your question before Leslie has to run away? Or do you want me to read it?
I don't understand what natural law is, or I understand it's very difficult to reverse the contract that you're in when you're born. I know some of that stuff, but like the Mayans used to do human sacrifice, it was considered religious and spiritual thing, and the people that were sacrificed took it as a great honor to be held like that. Today we don't do that. What's natural is made up by man. There's no such thing as an objective truth that humans make up laws. It's very society dependent. That's my
Don, can you just hang on a second because Leslie has to go and John Alder had a question. So I just wanted to make sure he has a space to ask his questions as well. John, nice to see you again. There's no sound coming out of you. even though you're unmuted. Well, I'm going to read his question then if he can. Are you speaking, John? Okay, I'll read his question. He put it in the chat. He was asking about morality and sexuality. He's reading a book on the miracle of semen retention. And what are your thoughts on choosing yourself over choosing to be a slave to lust, which is the norm today? Deprivation or discipline, power or pleasure?
Yeah. So again, the question itself is formulated into these the polarities. It's this or it's that. And the answer is that as long as your actions are not causing harm to another sentient being, then you get to experience life and experiment in life in as many creative ways as possible. When it comes to sexuality, if we are going to kind of go back to what I would say, if we're talking about what is natural, we need to go back to as much evidence in history before a lot of the kind of human-made, man-made constructs occurred. And one of book I was recently reading called The Great Cosmic Mother, she was talking about the Bronze Age and the Iron Ages, and is coming in and imposing what she's calling patriarchal, control and the Christian dogma to basically detach us from nature itself. And there's evidence of the original peoples who were very goddess loving, right? The goddess being the earth herself that contains masculine and feminine principles, that is that which births life, right? And that birthing life is a sacred thing. And so the value of life itself and the way, the natural ways of being in our human bodies, appreciating and valuing our sexuality, our bodies, our interactions in, in communities where there's a sense of recognizing the filiality, the philos, the brotherhood, the familial, the community, right? As that we all have a certain responsibility to the whole, and that valuing the individual and the small as well as the collective simultaneously, and that can be done, right? And that can be done through in such a way as long as we're not intentionally causing destruction or through violence, right? That's hurting individuals. And so when we're looking at deprivation or discipline, of course, deprivation and discipline may be tools or choices that we make. We may deprive ourselves in order to help another. And but the spirit of what we choose is around voluntary interaction. And so another way of, looking at natural law is to recognize that this is about us making voluntary choices in how we manage our energy and how we manage our power and how we seek our pleasure. If we want pleasure, pleasure is a perfectly fine thing, but to seek pleasure by imposing our will and hurting another, living thing is a violation of, natural law. It's causing harm that has objective. What makes this subjective is that it has evidence of consequence. Now, in the work I do with meeting with probably thousands of people at this point, I can see very clearly that there's a linear consequence of harmful behaviors towards children, for example. If you are, beating children, just, doing violence towards children, there are consequences internally, and those internal consequences have external ramifications, and those affect other people and anyone else in their lives that they interact with, and you could map that out if you had a big enough lens. So I'm not sure if that answers this question, but I think that, there's all sorts of opportunities for us to learn about our capacity for our 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 power as humans that we're not anywhere near achieving. And a lot of the reason is because we are being thwarted by a system of slavery, a system of statism and authority-based living that is really stopping us from our full expression and our full capacity to learn about what we can do, our potential. If we feel safe, that things are unlimited, right? And clearly there's natural things that we have to be up again that, we could have a tree fall on us, right? So we're talking about what humans do to other humans and what we do to the earth and what we do to animals and things like that. So I'm going to let Chris answer
Thank
more
you
of the
very much.
question about natural law. So
Thank you.
thank you very much for having me here. I've enjoyed this, and I enjoy this type of panel stuff. So
You're great. We're going to definitely hang out again.
awesome. Thanks so much. Have a great night. Bye.
All right, Chris, did you want to answer any of the questions? The chat has been fire today. I mean, there's so many great concepts. John, did you get your mic to work? Hang on, Chris.
Yes, I did.
Yay! Hi, John. Nice seeing you.
Hi.
So, unfortunately, Leslie had to go, but did you have any other questions or comments?
Well, I would like to explore that idea a little bit more. She answered a lot of things, not necessarily the semen retention aspect of things, which is what I'm reading that book about right now, which is a very good book. If you haven't read it, The Miracle of Semen Retention. And somebody just said there's attachment style lust and there's pleasure. Yeah, I didn't read that before it disappeared.
He just showed it. He just wrote it. It just popped up.
Well, was that his answer?
No, but Marshall just said that attachment style lust versus, like, I think that if my personal opinion, as a psychology expert, not a psychologist, but I would say that if your life is being taken over by something, by an interest, by focus, by something, then you have to examine if it's good for you or bad for you. If you're enjoying sexual activity, but it's not taking anything away from you, and you still have the power and the ability to perform healthfully in the world, you shouldn't have to worry about. Like, there is a danger in falling into that sort of like obsessive thing, like eating super, super healthy and not doing anything and not wearing any weird fabrics and not stepping on cement and not using light bulbs. And it becomes a little bit like you become a slave to the system.
I don't do any of those things.
Well, no, but like a lot of people, right? Like they put so many things on themselves, right? That they're like, oh, I can't do this, I can't do this, I can't go out because the oil in the restaurant is not perfect, and all of these things, right? So essentially, I think what Leslie was trying to say about a balance, you're balancing your inner with your outer and creating if you're feeling lustful in a way that's taking away from your experience in life, yeah, absolutely, do whatever you need. But if it's like flowing, if the energy is flowing easily through your body and you're enjoying life, I don't know if you should have to look at it. You know what I mean? Like, what's your goal, essentially?
Well, it's a very interesting topic. I mean, one thing I'll say, you said about being in the cage of, and my goal is to be as successful as possible in everything, in my business, in my art, and everything. And so one thing you said about, yeah, there's all these things that, you don't want to be in the cage of. Well, I try not to wear fabric that's not organic cotton, and I eat exclusively organic, and I don't eat out. And I try not to walk on the cement. I have to a little bit in the mornings, but then I make it a point to walk on the dirt. That my back feels better, my knees feel better. So all those examples are pointing, towards the semen retention being a positive, if that's something you believe in. And then as far as the cage goes, the whole cage concept of, yeah, you do all these things and you're in a cage. Well, you could make the same argument and say that, yeah, well, being a slave to lust puts you in a cage, and you're in a cage with lust, a cage made out of lust. And that's what we're talking about society does a lot of bad things. That's one of the major things that society does today is no sexual morality, and you know, people have no control over their sexual urges. And the most successful people in the world are the ones who have very high degrees of control over their sexual urges.
I'd like to get in on this here.
Go for it and get buried.
Okay. Like what Chris was saying about you have to make choices, but in order to make choices, you want to have some knowledge of what are the best choices to make, what are the bad choices to make. And knowledge is a broader, holistic idea. Instead of dealing with your life as this piece and that piece, patch here and a patch there, like the little boy sticking his fingers in the holes in the dam, well, eventually the dam's going to break because you can't cover everything. So if you work from a holistic idea of how does everything work, and then I'll differentiate that into the particular things in my life that I also want to get a grip on from a holistic pattern, because then things make sense. But if you're down at the battlefront dealing with this and that and this and that, you can't put it all together. And so you're doomed. So with knowledge, you can first of all see that knowledge is a very strict pattern of how it works. It works in alignment with the whole universe, how the universe works. And there's order to the universe. Behind me, you see a galaxy. It has order. It's structured. And the universe is structured, and knowledge comes out of consciousness and the mind, and that has structure. Then the very divinity of man is that spark of volition, the power to choose. And with that, you want to know, what is a human being? What is a human nature? Because as Aristotle says, in order to live a good life, you have to function in line with your nature. And we haven't been taught what is human nature, but it's pretty explicit because it's the four primary principles of knowledge. It's intention, it's cognition, it's rationality, and it's realization. And everything under that human nature is all the rest of knowledge, everything under the sun, as how we can differentiate what our experience teaches us and how we can respond to it. So these problems need to be taught from the top down, not from the bottom up. And that's the problem of what we're talking about here is everybody's talking about from the bottom up. Not going to get you very far. It's going to get you in trouble.
And I just want to quickly address another question that was asked earlier by Dawn. If you want to know more about natural law, Mark Passio has a really good series on natural law. And even if you don't agree with his later work, this one is really, really foundational. And it's just great. Like the whole series is really, really good. So I definitely recommend you listening to it.
Also, I put into the chat there, Bonnie McMurray gave me a link to Alex, what is it?
Zek.
Alex Zek and his The Way Forward. And he had a panel of people who really understood natural law and equity. And their discussion is fantastic. So if you see in the chat that link, I suggest you take your time and listen, because it shows you the way out of all these contracts that we don't even know we're entangled into, and how to step aside, not even with any argument, just saying, show me the contract. If you just stop arguing, because then you get yourself entangled. But these guys are saying, look, you just make an inquiry and say, I want to know how you make me liable to taxes, to controls, speech, censorship, all that. So that's a very powerful video, and I suggest you take a look at it.
Nice. Thank you, Barry. Okay, are there any more questions for Mr. Jantzen? Because he's the star of the show today. Star. Anybody?
So, Chris, are you the one that's talking about the 10,000 people group, or was that Don? The people stepping up and making their presence known to authority?
No, and in fact, I'm not sure what I know. I've seen some point Alex Zek's information, but like I know there are people that like to get out and talk about, like the sovereign citizen group and different ways to agree and disagree with judicial systems, and I don't get into any of that myself. I try to avoid the whole system as much as possible, being that the system that we have is based on ignorance of natural law, because natural law is only the universal, principles that exist in reality that govern human interaction. So in other words, if more of us do immoral things like stealing, then we create an outcome for all of other people that is more people being enslaved. It does not. I know there are speakers over time who have used the term natural law and apply it specifically to some sort of system of arguing against politics and this and that, but I'm really getting at base fundamental principles of reality of what is a right? Where does a right come from? A right is a universally granted by the fact that we're alive and we have being, and that we have choice, right? And so
that's what natural law underlines. Natural law is about that divine essence of what humanity is, and all the rights that go with that power to choose and to act accordingly to one's own light and love and wisdom. So those people who are talking, they're talking about there's a parallel systems. There's the natural law system that is the base, and they know it. But then there's the corporate admiralty law, which makes us all vessels in the sea under admiralty law. No constitution, no rights, and that's a contract. And you have to know how to say no more. I'm not in that contract. I refuse to be taken into that without my consent. And then you know how to bring yourself down to natural law, because that's where the substance is. Your own private life. You build your private life. You don't have to be all involved with all this entanglement. So.
And there is a Canadian named Kyle Washington who does deep dives into the common law and using common law with people outside and stuff. He's not in autonomy, but he's pretty cool.
Yeah,
anyway, take a look at that video that I put up. That's important.
That's not natural law, Don. Mayan law is not natural law. Hammurabi's law is not natural law. Natural law is something beyond humanity. It's a basis for everything in nature. So you're talking about cerebral laws, like laws from somebody's mind, not a law that governs like gravity or whatever, you know what I mean? That governs everything. So you guys, seriously, just no questions from the rest of the people who are a little more shy?
Well, I guess I'll add something. I had a great conversation. It reminds me of this morning I was reading something. It was Ralph Waldo Emerson. The essay was Self-Reliance. And the thing that stuck out on me when I read that, there was a small section and it basically said I'm gonna have to paraphrase because I can't remember it verbatim exactly, but it was along the lines of insisting in yourself, because to paraphrase, basically when we try to be something that we're not, right, it obviously we have to cultivate that, and that takes effort and energy. But when we insist on who we truly are, naturally, right, as a human being here, and get to those basic questions that like Chris Janssen's been specifically mentioning. I think that when we are truly like one with the way nature is, that's when it's like almost effortless, right? Like it's you can do amazing things that will maybe take someone else that doesn't have that gift, because we all have our unique gifts. um and so in any event, I just wanted to add that note there about just hearing this conversation reminded me of that theme that's been surfacing today, which is kind of just insisting in being who we naturally are, and we all have that our own uniqueness, right? And in so doing, I guess we can truly find power, right? Like that's just natural and effortless, is I guess what I wanted to add to the conversation.
Nice. So to answer Don,
Yeah,
is Mother Nature decides what's law. It's not humans.
let me
There.
also add here that law is a prohibitive statement that says you may not interfere with sovereign individuals. That the law is to say, stay out of the way of every individual has the right of passage, the right of property, the right of pursuit of their goals, their happiness, their health, their wealth. So it prohibits, it sets up a institution. If you're going to have, and I don't think you need to have more than a community level institution, but if you have a national institution under a constitution, the aim was originally to say you are only here to protect the sovereignty of the individuals that you represent. Now it's gone far, far away from that, but that was the original idea. That law was to leave everyone alone. No initiation of force or fraud or intimidation against anyone else. That's the base. That we all have a natural right to be equal under the law and have liberty without restriction. No infringement of our right to speak, our right to assemble, our right, all right to bear arms, all of that. So it's not that complicated.
It's often occurred to me that, anarchy, as misunderstood as the term is, would be the default condition of humanity. Before the invention of government or governing systems, we would have had the default condition, which would have been anarchy, which would have been no rulers. And we obviously survived that period of time in our history, otherwise we wouldn't exist anymore. So maybe we should head more in that direction. But at the basic, I think one simple way to look at it is, I've had people disagree with me about objective morality and there's philosophy that's endless going on that topic, and we can get in our heads about it and we can argue about things endlessly, but there are some things that we can have what we also call common sense about. And if we can have common sense about the basic golden rule of not taking things from one another, that would be a real good start. But we're not even there as humanity yet. We have our whole systems of governing for everyone, which are inherently stealing from everyone in their normal process, and then people accepting that as good, and that's something we should do. So, I think the biggest word that comes into my mind from the conversation, and actually this presentation I'm working on, is context. It's our really job personally, each of us, to put things into context. And it's asking some hard questions sometimes, like what really matters the most? What's really the most important? I can work on my self-discipline. Yeah, I can be a better person. I can be stronger. I can work on my own personal goals of success. And yeah, that might set a good example for some people around me. But, the great work, what I like to call the great work, is when we are stopped living just for our own personal selfish desire, and we have meaning. In other words, we're working towards a greater purpose, something that could help all of humanity, all of life, and something outside of just ourselves. And so I think we have to start with the self work, to be honest about who we are in this world and what we can do, given what we have, like I said, given the cards we've been dealt and the psyche we have at the time in life. And we need to work on ourselves and find our self-discipline and try to be a better person. But then outside of that, we need to think about, if we get to that, the next layer of transcendence is, what can I do to move forward the whole process for all of people and all of life? And that's the bigger challenge that requires us to come back to the beginning and ask us, well, what's right and what's wrong, and how should we be living? So that's what I like,
Chris,
the big question. So I always liked philosophy. So that's what I do.
We do have one more question in the chat, and I would like to open this question up to anybody who would like to answer. That includes JL and Mike Nimitz and whoever else has studied this and would like to answer. What is the difference between natural law and the predation that you would find from, you know, from nature? Like, what's the difference between natural law and nature? I feel like I'm in a Jeopardy song.
Well, I do try to, like, in my podcasts and presentations right up front, say that when I'm talking about evil, I'm not talking about lightning striking or bad things happen. You know, that's bad things happening in acts of nature. You know, when I'm talking about evil, I'm talking about humans doing things to other humans. And Leslie was pretty careful too in her wording of natural law. Sentient beings, other sentient beings is what we're talking about, is the relationship between us and other sentient beings, and the fact that we have the ability to discern right and wrong, because that's one of the amazing gifts of being human that defines us as being alive as human, is that we have that ability. And so animals is a different story, and how we treat animals matters, absolutely. But I'm not trying to judge how animals treat each other. That's not what the point of this, that's not the context of this discussion. The context and the point of this discussion is, how can we do better with what we have, given what we've been given? And we can't control the reality of what animals do. That just is what it is, you know. But what we can do is recognize what we've been given and what's right and wrong to do with that. And that's what I think we should be concerned with.
I think I saw Don trying to respond, but he had the mute on. Your mute button was on, Don. No? Okay. Barry?
All right. I like this idea of context, because we've actually not been told the context of the universe. We've told everything is material, random. Every place in the universe is homogeneous. There's no special places. And yet the truth is that the context, and that's beginning to kind of leak out in physics. But the truth is, there is a context of the universe has this thing behind me showing that there's an envelope of the physical plane, of the substantial plane, which is really just in the equatorial area of that universe. And that universe, according to very big minds like Nikola Tesla, saying everything is energy, frequency, vibration, resonance. And that's what you're seeing behind me there. And when you talk about structure, I spent 50 years of my life, from the time I was 30 years old. I'm now, as of 3 days ago, 80 years old. And
Happy birthday, Barry.
Thank you. So 50 years trying to figure out exactly how you structure knowledge that is in line with the universe. And I'll see if I can find a thing behind me here. But there is a structure that, first of all, the simplest way you divide something is by 2. You split it in half. And then you can split it in half again and again and again. And so you can begin to have a whole network of differential units or subdivided subcategories. And so
I don't know if this is still on the subject of the answer of the question, Barry.
Well, the answer is that what Chris is saying, you have to get an understanding of your position, of who you are and where you are. And so that context, and I really shouldn't go any further. I have a whole series of three different seasons of teaching this idea, the ontology of the knowledge, that has the context of the universe and consciousness. So, and that also goes to nature, where nature fits in. It's not the same thing as the aspect of consciousness that we're talking about with natural law. It comes from the same quantum energy. So anyway, I won't go any further into those kind of details, but there is a system that I have arranged for 50 years called the Essential Relations Ontological System. And I spill it out many, many times over, maybe 30 different replays in the University of Reason library. So that's where you can holistically go down the trail, splitting things into parts, so you get to know what are you having to deal with in reality. What is reality? And more importantly, what is my mind? How does my mind separate me from the reality so I'm not a prisoner to the reality? I'm not a prisoner to distractions, disruptions, all kinds of chaotic controls that are laid on me. I can step back in my mind and I have all kinds of potential so that my reaction isn't controlled by the outside. It's controlled by me inside. So let's leave it at that.
So what about Mike Nimitz or JL? Do you guys have, you don't have to open your mic if you don't want to, but I'm just wondering if you have a different answer to that question.
Well, to add to what Barry said, in regard to natural law, it is the natural system that is really like the fractal of the fractal, from the universe to the cellular structure. They're all basically the same, right? And if you create systems that are in harmony with those things, then it becomes very easy to discern what is excellent from what is crap. And I'll leave it at that.
I just shared the 6-hour seminar for you, Dawn. So you can click on that link and save it. That's the Marcasio one. And it's 6 hours. What about JL? I want to know what she says to that question. I know I said you don't have to unmute, but now I'm calling you out.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Agnieszka. Good to see you. Good to see you, Chris. It's a good question. I don't think I have the answer to that for sure. Except maybe to think that natural consequences in nature happen without deliberation. They don't, 12 people meet in a room and decide. It's usually delayed or immediate, usually immediate, and without question. Where natural law for a human can come in if we can agree on our definitions and agree on our context. Absolutely, Chris, context really does matter. And believe it or not, I'll just share this one quick thing. I have a classmate who was doing work on finding purpose for their client and finding meaning. So I found an article that I thought they would enjoy. And in the article, they talked about deriving meaning through gratitude, where the irony about the interaction was his definition of meaning, the meaning of meaning. If you can, just get the kind of funny irony there, was not the same. And so I also agree having those definitions, those common definitions, getting back to also Barry's work on what we are talking about when we say the words that we use. That probably didn't answer the question, but thank you for letting me share.
Well, no, that's a good answer. I like your answer. Everybody has
And
their own perspective.
and
Go
I
ahead.
don't think I have an answer either, but you know, this reminds me of like the whole Bunk Mr. Fuller. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. The guy who he came up with the, is it the C60, the fullerenes, or what do you call it? I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with the story of how he invented that, and it kind of is in relation to like nature and natural law. So the just to kind of summarize, the story is that he actually was suicidal one point, and he was contemplating suicide like in a lake. And then eventually he obviously didn't commit suicide, but he remembered that time, and he kind of buried that person. And it's like that person died that night. And then he began to like ask himself the questions like what what is like why am I here, you know, on this planet to do? And once he was able to really get curious uh like he kind of opened like kind of like an antenna, right, like a radio thing. And then he like the way he writes about it was that all this, like he just started seeing the natural order in everything. And in so doing, then he came up with like the whole football thing. I think he called it the fullerenes or whatever you call it. But in any event, I think that there is an underlying order in nature, kind of going off of what everyone's here has been saying. And I think that we're uh, intimately integrated into that. And if we, kind of going off of what Mike say, if we are in harmony with that, like that's where true power is. Like things can move easy. Like, you know, people talk about like moving mountains and, you know, all these things. Like that's where it happens. You have to be in line with the natural order of things. And anyway, so that's my little 2 cents.
It's a good 2 cents. I'm looking for our song to play us out, but I don't know if I can find it.
Okay, let's see here. Well, let's